Good morning, everybody. It is 7 o'clock. You are very welcome to join us on The Breakfast Show here on Sky News this morning. Wherever you're watching us around the world, you are waking up to the papers this morning, and you could be forgiven for thinking we've gone back in time to the 70s with strike headlines aplenty. That was the winter of discontent. Now, the season might be different, but the sentiment is still very much the same on the eve of the biggest rail strike in a generation, and warnings other workers could follow their lead. We'll ask the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, that's Simon Clarke, what the government is going to do about it. Also on the show, the Shadow Transport Secretary, Louise Haigh, who will also talk to the unions, who, in the form of the Deputy General of the TUC, who says that ministers are inflaming tensions, and the PCS General Secretary, Mark Sawatka, who's backing the right to strike. It's Monday, the 20th of June. A summer of discontent looms on the eve of the biggest rail strike in a generation. Warnings now that teachers, doctors and airport staff could go down the same track.
I'm here at King's Cross Station in central London, where commuters are preparing for a week of heavy disruption.
Angry, depressed and losing sleep. A new Sky News poll reveals how many more of us are worried about the cost of living.
It's just so hard having to get up every day and put a brave face on things when all I'm doing on the inside is just falling apart.
Firefighters in Spain and Germany are battling blazes caused by a heatwave. Experts are linking to climate change. Starved by war, millions face famine across the Horn of Africa after years of drought. And now the impact of war in Ukraine. We report from Somaliland.
The war there may be thousands of miles away from these markets, but it's pushing up the prices of grain and fuel to unprecedented levels, making the impact of the drought even worse.
Also coming up on the programme for you this morning, the swimming ruling about transgender athletes that's making waves. We'll speak to the founder of Transgender Trend about what her views on protecting young children are.
Bad habits lead to late nights, sitting alone, conversations with a stranger I barely know.
Records, breaking records, why Ed Sheeran is celebrating this month. Gotta love a bit of Ed, haven't you? First thing in the morning. Now, the winter of discontent, remember that? It might be the season of summer, but the headlines hark back to the 70s today on the eve of the biggest rail strike in a generation. The TUC says ministers are inflaming tensions, and now there are warnings that teachers and doctors could also strike too over the coming months. More than 50,000 train workers are expected to strike across the week. Strikes will take place this Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday, but severe delays are expected all of the week. Many companies are telling people to avoid travelling entirely. Workers in England will be striking, but services in Scotland and Wales will also be impacted. These are all the companies affected. But Network Rail says just over 1 in 5 of the normal number of trains will run, and they'll start later and finish much earlier than usual. The RMT union leading the strike argue that its members have experienced pay freezes, threats to jobs and attacks on their terms and conditions.
So we used to take train Saturday and Sunday, so it's going to really affect us.
But I think that people should, be heard, and if they want more pay for what they do, I don't see why they should, not strike.
But if they want to strike for better conditions, then that's good for them. But I lose out as a result, so no, I don't have much sympathy.
Well, Shingy's standing by at King's Cross in central London for us this morning. Morning, Shingy. How are people feeling there this morning?
Morning, Kay. You get the sense, which is similar to some of the people you spoke to earlier. There's a bit of frustration, but also a bit of understanding about why these strikes are taking place. They're, of course, being led by RMT, a union who are calling for pay rises in line with inflation, as well as an end to proposed job cuts. But with these strikes come massive disruption. People will be trying to take exams tomorrow who may need trains. There'll be people who need hospital appointments who may need to use the trains as well. And then later on in the week, if the strikes on Thursday and Saturday go ahead, you have massive events like Glastonbury and the British Athletics Championships. It's a highly political issue, it's highly divisive, and people here will no doubt have opinions on these strikes.
Thanks. Well, joining us now, Chief Secretary to the Treasury, in the studio, as you can see, and that's Simon Clarke. Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us. What's the government going to do about it?
Well, we hope very much that ongoing talks between the employer and the unions will make progress today, and clearly, from our point of view, we want to see a resolution to this issue, but we obviously want to see a resolution that works for everybody, and that needs to work for rail workers, but critically it needs to work for passengers and the taxpayer as well. And that's what underpins this whole process. We need a railway which is both sustainable in terms of its costs, but also in terms of the service it provides to the public. And at the moment, we don't have that. The taxpayer supported the railway industry very substantially during the pandemic. We're now coming out of that. We need the railway to be, as I say, a sustainable force in our country. It isn't. Those changes need to be secured as part of this wider negotiation. So
what are you going to do to stop the strike?
Well, as I say, we continue to make sure that those talks have the support from government that they need. But ultimately, this is a matter between the employers, the train operating companies and Network Rail, and the trade unions. And the government doesn't sit directly as a part of those talks for a very good reason. We don't intervene in the specific process between an employer and the unions representing employees, but we are there to provide the support and the enabling framework for those talks to succeed.
But if you don't get involved, the country's going to grind to a halt for a week.
Well, ultimately, Kay, we don't control all the levers that need to be that need to be held here as the employer. The employer is Network Rail and the train operating companies. They are the ones who need to drive the programme of reform to make the railway sustainable. We don't own the railways ourselves, and it wouldn't be right for us to substitute ourselves for the role of the employer. We recognise these strikes are a huge inconvenience for millions of people. I absolutely want them not to go ahead, but it isn't the case that we can put ourselves into the hot seat in place of the legal employer.
No, you say you're not getting involved with the negotiations, but then you say something like this at the weekend. What we can't do is have unrealistic expectations around pay, which do in turn prolong and intensify this inflation problem, because we all want it to end, and the way it will end soonest is if we are sensible about pay. So you are getting involved.
Well, my comments there were in the context of the wider public sector pay review bodies process, which is taking place at the moment, which will determine pay for the people who the government does employ directly. That is to say, our teachers, our nurses, our police.
This doesn't apply to the rest.
Well, it sets an overall framework which is important for employers to understand, which is that obviously public sector pay discipline really matters here. We have an inflation problem in this country, as indeed is common across the Western world after the pandemic. If we don't want that problem to either intensify or prolong itself, then we need to be sensible around pay awards. If we give awards which are above inflation in this landscape, then we are in a really difficult place in terms of bringing down inflation, which in turn obviously is driving the cost of living.
But that's not what the RMT is asking for. They're asking for 7.1%, and inflation looks as though it'll be riding at something like 11%.
Well, the issue we need to secure for the railways is about making sure that you have a sustainable offer on pay, but also linked to productivity reform as well, because the railways are not run as efficiently as they could be. There are all sorts of practices there which are seriously outdated, which make the railways both more expensive to operate, but also less efficient in terms of their operation than they otherwise ought to be. And so there's a variety of things that need to change, whether that be in ticket offices or in terms of maintenance or in terms of different unions not really offering the smoothest possible service when it comes to how they operate, which do need to change if the taxpayer and the fare payer is to get the right deal.
So it's the right idea then for effectively rail workers to suffer a pay cut?
Well, in the current situation with inflation, which is a real issue, we do have to be very, very sensitive that if we start having pay awards which take us close to double digits, then we are going to see this problem prolonged, and that is just the economic reality of where we find ourselves at the moment. And
so is that a yes then?
Well, I'm not. As I say, I'm not the legal employer in this dispute, and so I'm not going to substitute myself for Network Rail or for the train operating companies. But we do absolutely need to have an understanding across the wider public sector that we cannot have inflation-busting pay increases, because that will, in turn, drive the problem we're trying to solve.
How likely do you think it is that strikes will go ahead?
I fear it is likely that they will go ahead. Clearly, we will continue to support the negotiations until such time as there's no more time to discuss. But I think the public do this week need to be aware there will be very substantial disruption, and it is therefore sensible to make preparations for that.
Now, you want to tell us a little bit about a cost of living calculator, which will reflect the national insurance and how people will be saving money or otherwise. But at the weekend, we saw thousands of people coming to central London to demonstrate about the cost of living crisis. Is this government tone deaf when it comes to what's happening?
No, absolutely not. I mean, we are very confident that the £37 billion package of support that we've put in place, much of which, of course, is yet to kick in because it will be paid into people's bank accounts throughout the course of the summer and the autumn ahead, will very substantially help with the cost of living pressures that families are facing. And it's worth £1,200 for roughly 1 in 3 UK homes. For most families, it's worth at least £550 this year. It is something which is there to help people. Look, the trade union movement, who are not, it must be said, normally massive supporters of Conservative governments, will take...
Word, though, the trade union.
No, it's most certainly...
representing all of these people.
It's most certainly not, but it is fair to say that I don't think this can be taken as a snapshot of mainstream Britain. This is the TUC on a march. That is a very different group of people to the wider public. We all recognise that there are real challenges at the moment, but it is this government working to try and make sure that we come out of the pandemic, that we grow the economy and that we manage the public finances responsibly.
But the TUC is representing lots of trade union members, of course, and it does look as though, from reading the papers this morning, that more and more of those trade unions will be balloting their members to go on strike. It looks as though we are heading towards a summer of discontent.
Well, look, we have to see what happens with the individual unions. What I'd emphasise is there is a pay review body process that's in place across government. That's independent of government, so there are independent groups of experts who recommend pay awards, and it's then for individual government departments to respond to those for the workforces concerned. But those bodies are reporting throughout the course of June, and then government departments will set out their response in due course. From what I understand, and it is early days, those awards are coming in at a sensible level, which is great. It does mean that there will be good pay offers, I think, on the table for public sector workforces. It's important that we wait and see what those awards are, and then obviously it will be for individual workforces and the trade unions to respond. But I do think people have to recognise, if we're going to forestall the evil of inflation, and inflation destroys savings, it destroys growth, it damages any economy where it gets an endemic grip, then we are going to have to show collective, society-wide responsibility. And I think that's a message which people watching this programme will understand.
It's difficult for people who are struggling to make ends meet as it is, and they look as though they are realistically going to have a pay cut given what's happening with inflation. So they are going to exercise their democratic right, potentially, to go on strike. And as a result, you may well find yourselves with a summer of discontent.
Well, we'll cross...
Do you acknowledge that that's a possibility?
No, what I would say is I recognise that there is sacrifice involved in this situation. We've put in place a £37 billion package of support to help address it. I'm not going to preempt what the results of individual pay review body processes will be or how the trade unions will respond. As I say, all I can do is emphasise the government is trying in good faith to manage what is a very difficult balancing act between making sure that people get the pay awards that they deserve, and our public sector workers genuinely do the most fantastic job. But this has to be set against the wider responsibility the government has to the public finances to make sure they are sustainable. We're spending £83 billion this year on our debt interest payments after COVID. We cannot afford to get into a situation where we lose control of the public finances and in turn all suffer.
Unions are disagreeing, aren't they? And they're saying, we're going to ballot our members unless we get a realistic pay rise.
With great respect to the trade union leaders, they obviously don't come at this from the point of view of a Conservative government. We have a mandate from the British public to manage the national finances sensibly. That's always, in the end, what a Conservative government is there to do. It is vitally important that as we come out of this incredibly difficult situation where we are facing the twin headwinds of what's happened with COVID and now, of course, war in Europe, that we do strike the right balance here.
And when you're talking about public sector pay, are you suggesting, given that you're suggesting that potentially there will be reasonable pay offers, they will match inflation?
I'm not going to preempt the results of the individual pay review bodies, but I think it is unlikely that they will match the headline rate of inflation at the rates we're now seeing. But that is precisely the point I'm making, that if we try and match or exceed inflation, if we end up in a cycle where everyone starts targeting the levels that we're seeing now, 9-10%, that is going to be totally unsustainable.
Public sector workers have to prepare for a pay cut.
Well, I think the private sector as well will go through this, Kay. I think the point is very, very few people are going to be getting pay offers which are in double figures. And I think it would be highly unsustainable if they were to do so.
Talk to me about airport chaos, because it is absolutely chaotic at the moment at many of our airports. Is Brexit to blame?
No, I think what we're seeing here is the result of the airline industry having obviously massively contracted during the pandemic, and now it's facing this surge of pent-up demand as things stand back up. And truth be told, it isn't resourced and manned for that challenge. That's why I think it is sensible that what we're starting to see now is some of the airports revising their schedules for the summer season ahead, because frankly we can't have a repeat of the scenes that we've been having at some of our airports over recent weeks. And I know the Transport Secretary and ministers there have been working very closely with the airline industry to try and get it into a more sensible place, because they are, at the moment, offering flights they simply can't honour, and that is terrible for passengers.
Absolutely mental at some of these airports at the moment. I mean, the chief exec of Ryanair says is blaming the chaos on inflexible post-Brexit labour market, and the CEO of Wizz Air saying the UK's post-Brexit immigration policy is putting a lot of strain on the labour market. So they say it's Brexit's.
Well, I mean, ultimately, I think the British people made their views very clear on unlimited immigration from the EU, and there were very good reasons why we voted to have a controlled immigration policy.
Is this the result?
But I do not accept that this is simply a direct pass-through effect from Brexit. What I would say is this is the result of an industry which massively slimmed down, and understandably so, at a time when flying was well nigh impossible for a year and a half, 2 years. It's now massively expanded its operations, and the pressure is enormous, and it hasn't managed to align the two. We will do our part as government to try and make sure that our side of things is right, from issues like passports to border control. And obviously, we're pouring resource into this, and we're making sure that the whole processes are as robust as they can be. But in turn, the airlines need to do their part of things, and that make sure that the flights that they're actually offering can indeed be honoured, and that's the key thing.
What does pouring resource mean?
It means that we're making sure that all of these departments, whether that be the Border Force or the Passport Office, have the resources they need to manage this. And as part of the spending review we conducted last October, we obviously made sure that all of our Home Office infrastructure has the funding it needs to do the job.
What do you want to say to people who are waiting at home, who could be one of those 500,000 people that are waiting for their passports?
Well, we all recognise the frustrations that go with waiting for a passport and the pressure that comes if there's a holiday imminent. What I can say is that the government is working flat out to make sure that people get those in a timely fashion. And as I understand it, the waiting times are coming down, which is really positive, and that's something we'll continue to prioritise.
We're out of time, sadly. It's good to talk to you. Thank you
very much
indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
As always. Let's have a look what the papers are saying. My goodness, the Metro features the upcoming rail strikes, which the paper says could be the biggest rail shutdown in 30 years. The Guardian says a failure by government ministers to negotiate with unions means strikes will go ahead this week. Just hearing there from the minister, he also thinks that the strikes will go ahead. Rail union threat to strike for 6 months is the headline on the front of the Daily Telegraph. The Daily Mail says the rest of the summer could be affected by strike action as unions threaten walkouts by teachers, NHS staff, barristers and postmen. The Times is also leading with proposed plans for doctors and teachers to strike this summer. This country is returning to the 70s is the headline on The Sun, referring to a summer of strikes. And the Daily Star says there is another heatwave on the way thanks to the warm air travelling up from Spain. There you go, front of the Daily Star. Now, as the cost of living crisis continues to bite, a Sky News poll suggests that almost a third of people feel more depressed about their household finances now than they did 6 months ago. A national mental health charity has warned that people will die if funding doesn't increase to match demands for services. A warning this report from our People and Politics correspondent Nick Martin contains references to suicide.
Susan Lopez works full-time as a carer, but her pay is low and the hours are uncertain. After all her bills are paid, she says there's often only a few pounds left to live on.
I actually can't afford to get the blinds. It's just newspaper for now, until I can afford it.
Susan says the rising cost of living means her mental health has never been so bad.
It's just so hard having to get up every day and put a brave face on things when all I'm doing on the inside is just falling apart. I don't want to be here anymore. That's honestly how I feel. I just don't want to be here anymore. I've had enough of life. I can't take it anymore. I can't take the cost of living anymore. It's just too expensive. How are we going to be able to afford to pay gas bills and electric bills when we're not making the money to do it?
Susan's not alone. A Sky News poll has revealed just how damaging this crisis could prove to be to the nation's mental health. More than 60% of people we asked said they felt more worried about the cost of living than they did 6 months ago. Nearly a third said they were more angry, and a similar number said they felt more depressed now. And 1 in 5 people said the rising cost of living was affecting their sleep.
We've just seen an awful rise in sort of people just coming to the service. What are that emotional support for people? We try and help them sort of sort out their finances, get the right support put in place, contact councils, food banks for them, and just try and get them sort of figured out and in the right place, really. We've seen clients who sort of, their suicidality is increased a lot, related to sort of the worries that they've got about the future and not being able to cope at the moment.
The government says it's providing 8 million of the most vulnerable households with extra support this year. It says it'll spend an additional £2.3 billion a year by 2024 on mental health services. But Susan says she's not had enough support to help her through this difficult time in her life.
The government's all about making the rich richer and the poor poorer. That's in my eyes. We'll put the taxes up, we'll put the national insurance up. It's not fair on people who work, because then they're made to suffer and they're made to struggle. See, I cry myself to sleep every single night just asking God to take me, because I don't want to be here.
Susan is now receiving one-to-one support to help with her mental health. But this costs money, and as this crisis deepens, this kind of help is likely to be in high demand. Nick Martin, Sky News, Sunderland.
And if you've been affected by any of the issues raised in Nick's report, you can, of course, contact the Samaritans on 116123 or email joe@samaritans.org, joe@samaritans.org. And you can watch Nick's full report on mental health and the cost of living crisis at 9:30 and throughout the day here on Sky News. And given what we were just talking to the Minister about, we've just got some breaking news from EasyJet. They're saying they're cutting more flights in the busy summer period to help manage operational problems, including staff shortages in ground handling and flight caps at London, Gatwick and Amsterdam. The airline said it's now expected its capacity in the quarter to the end of June to be around 87% of 2019 levels, and its fourth quarter to end September to be around 90%. Adding that there would be a cost impact from the disruption. So that from EasyJet saying that there will be problems and more flight caps at London, Gatwick and Amsterdam. We've heard from Wizz Air and also from Ryanair, who are blaming Brexit for the problems. We heard there from the Minister a few moments ago saying that's not the case at all. It's the airlines who've not scaled up quickly enough. Still to come on the programme for you, ahead of strikes across the country's rail network this week, joined by the Trade Union Congress Deputy General Secretary, that's Paul Novak. Then speaking to the Telegraph's travel editor Claire Irvin to get her assessment of the recent travel chaos in the UK. And at the top of the next hour, we'll get more reaction to those planned rail strikes with Labour's Shadow Transport Secretary, that's Louise Haigh. Looking at some of today's other headlines for you, though, and Emmanuel Macron has lost his majority after France's parliamentary elections. We'll have more on that. And police in Brazil have identified 5 more suspects in the murder of the British journalist Dom Phillips and his local guide Bruno Pereira. Officers want to speak to the group about claims they helped hide the bodies in the Amazon. They previously arrested 3 other men in connection with the killings, one of whom has confessed to the murders. The energy regulator Ofgem has proposed new measures to protect consumers' money and stop energy suppliers from raising customers' direct debit payments by more than necessary. Ofgem says the measures are aimed at reducing the risk of suppliers going bust, as well as protecting customers from being overcharged. Speaking to the head of Ofgem, that's Jonathan Brearley this morning, for more on the plans. President Zelensky has predicted that Russia will intensify its attacks on Ukraine this week as Kiev awaits a decision on its bid to join the EU. His warning follows a European Commission recommendation to grant Kiev candidate status to join. And as far as Emmanuel Macron is concerned, he's lost his majority, as I said, in France's parliamentary elections. His centrist Ensemble coalition remains the largest party in the National Assembly, but the hung parliament could mean he'll face difficulty fulfilling his domestic agenda. Marine Le Pen's national rally saw an 11-fold rise in its number of seats, its best result on record. Most children in reception year in Wales will receive free school meals from September. It's the first stage in the Welsh Government's plan to offer free school meals to all primary school children by 2024 in response to the cost of living crisis. The English golfer Matt Fitzpatrick is the new US Open golf champion. It's his first major title. He finished on 6 under par after final rounds, 68. He becomes just the 4th English player in the last century to win the event. And was he not as cool as a cucumber? Now, the world governing body of elite swimming has banned transgender athletes from competing in women's events if they've gone through any part of male puberty. FINA also said it will look at establishing an open category for swimmers whose gender identity is different than their sex at birth. But some believe the ruling is unnecessary.
Who do they think are going to compete in those events? The world population of trans women is 0.25%. Even that 0.25% don't all play sports. How much you could hold it in a telephone box?
Although a former Olympic medalist welcomed the ruling as a sensible move.
Leah Thomas, before she transitioned, was 800th in the world. And last year, when she won the NC2As, she beat 3 Olympic medalists from America. That's a massive improvement in 1 year, don't you think?
And we'll be speaking further about this topic to the founder and director of the Transgender Trend organisation. That's Stephanie Davies-Ari. And stay tuned for more on that throughout the course of the show. Meantime, over the past few weeks, we've been bringing you updates about Dame Deborah James, who announced last month that she's receiving end-of-life care at her parents' home in her battle with bowel cancer. She's posted this on social media to mark Father's Day. There she is. She spent the day with her dad, Alistair, and in this heartbreaking caption says he's brushing her hair because she no longer has the strength to brush it herself. Well, she's still proving an inspiration to so many people. Her fundraising page now standing at more than £6.7 million raised so far for Cancer Research UK. You can go onto the Just Giving page and support Dame Deborah if you would like to. Wildfires are spreading through countries in Europe as the continent bakes in searing temperatures. Firefighters in Spain are struggling to contain wildfires as part of the country experiencing temperatures of more than 40 degrees. At least 18 villages have been evacuated and military firefighting units deployed with high temperatures and dry and windy conditions expected until Wednesday. Meanwhile, Germany has also seen a number of forest fires over the weekend. Strong winds have been fanning a blaze near the town of Treubritzen, about 30 miles south of Berlin, prompting the evacuation of 3 nearby villages. And weather experts are predicting a summer of sunshine, with the UK set to bask in up to 4 heat waves. After an unsettled weekend, forecasters say the hot weather is soon to return, with temperatures expected to hit 28 degrees centigrade, that's 82 degrees Fahrenheit this week. Now, someone you may have heard of who is playing at the O2 and Wembley has been proving his popularity once again.
Bad habits lead to late nights, sitting alone, conversations with a stranger I barely know.
Gotta love Ed in the morning. The most played artist of 2021 in the UK, and has also claimed the year's most played single with that one, Bad Habits. The pop superstar is the first artist to claim both accolades in 2 different years, having previously done the double in 2017. Love it. Now, Freya's put some pictures together for you today. Have a look at these. This is the image that we were showing you a few moments ago. Lots of the papers focusing on these piles and piles of baggage at Heathrow Terminal 2 as flight cancellations and delays continue. And in the corner, there he is. He's a pilot helping out at Edinburgh Airport to get luggage onto the plane. Can you see? He actually got off the plane and started helping load the luggage in order that his passengers could be on their way. A different kind of pilot now in the Times. Take a look at this. The Spirit of Wartime enactment group posed as American air crew at the Duxford Summer Air Show this weekend. Love that. And the Speaker of the House of Commons, Sir Lindsay Hoyle. Here he is with his kitten in the Telegraph. He's named after Clement Attlee, the post-war Labour Prime Minister. What a great picture that is. Lindsay Hoyle there. This image in the Express this morning from the Blair Drummond Safari Park. Mum and Dad, Liberty and Phil, cradle their new baby, Fear. Glorious picture. Love that. And a last one from the Telegraph this morning. Bathers are pictured in rubber rings in an artificial wave pool in Nanjing in China's Zhengzhou province yesterday. It's pretty cool, isn't it? Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. In the last half an hour, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury has told this programme he thinks the biggest rail strikes in decades can't be stopped from going ahead. Simon Clarke warned commuters should prepare for the worst and that there would be substantial disruption.
I fear it is likely that they will go ahead. Clearly, we will continue to support the negotiations until such time as there's no more time to discuss. But I think the public do this week need to be aware there will be very substantial disruption, and it is therefore sensible to make preparations for that.
Joining us now from Birkenhead is Paul Novak, TUC Deputy General Secretary. Hi, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. I know that you're suggesting that the government should adopt a more positive approach to try to sort out this strike. It doesn't look as though that's the case.
No, unfortunately, it doesn't, Kay. And this strike is not inevitable. I think the RMT have always been very clear that they think that there's a negotiated settlement to resolve the concerns that their members have. But you can't get that negotiated settlement if the government and employers insist on imposing job cuts and pay cuts unilaterally. So I know talks are happening this morning. I would hope that the government, rather than talking up these strikes, actually gets into the room and makes helps resolve the issues. That'd be good for our RMT members, but it'd be good for the travelling public as well.
Why should the government do that? It's not their job.
Well, actually, everybody knows that the financial envelope that the train operating companies and Network Rail are working with has been set by government. And just to say, Kay, I think the root of this dispute lie in that spending review last year. The government announced it was going to slash funding for rail. We used to meet government ministers regularly during the pandemic to talk about issues around rail, myself and all of the rail unions. We had very positive discussions, didn't always agree, but positive discussions about how we were going to help the industry emerge from the pandemic. But unfortunately, we had that spending review. And since then, the shutters have come down. I don't think our unions have met a rail minister since March of this year. So Grant Shapps needs to stop messing around. Everybody knows that he could help resolve this dispute. And I think the government needs to take that responsibility.
How can he do that when the head of the RMT says he wouldn't be seen dead negotiating with the Tory government?
Well, I don't think that's the case. I know Mick Lynch and I know the other leaders of the RMT, and I know that they're very pragmatic and they'll sit down and discuss with anybody if it means getting a fair resolution for their members. And they've always been clear that the solution to this dispute lies in a negotiation. But you can't have a negotiation when one side goes into those talks saying, well, whatever happens, you're going to have a real terms pay cut and you're going to lose 2,500 jobs. I mean, if I was an RMT member, I'd be extremely concerned about that. That's why those 40,000 rail workers have taken that very difficult decision to vote for industrial action. And so I hope that the government and the employers will come to the table positively, listen to the concerns of those rail workers. These are people who care about the service that they provide. They care passionately about the rail industry. They want to serve the travelling public, but they can't do it when their pay is being slashed and jobs are being potentially lost.
Yeah, but Grant Shapps says that he was told by union bosses last month that they wouldn't be seen dead negotiating with the Tory government. Is he?
To be fair, Kay, Grant Shapps also said at the weekend that the RMT had walked out talks on Saturday to attend a TUC rally, and clearly that wasn't the case. There were no talks scheduled for Saturday. So rather than grandstanding, what Grant Shapps should do is not negotiate over the airwaves, but around the table with the unions. And he needs to be clear that actually our rail industry is going to need support as we emerge from the pandemic. Every government around the world has supported its rail industry. Of course, passenger numbers aren't quite where they were before the pandemic, but we all want a successful, sustainable railway, and we have to think imaginatively about how we do that. Let's remember, during the last 2 years, the train operating companies have taken £500 million worth of profits out of our rail system. Let's have a discussion about that before we talk about cutting the pay of rail workers.
We heard from the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, Simon Clarke, on this show and over the weekend, saying that wage rises would cause an inflationary spiral that will take us back to the 1970s. And Andrew Bailey, who is the Governor of the Bank of England, as you know, says that workers need to show restraint.
Yeah, well, I have to say, I take both those comments with a huge pinch of salt, to be honest with you, Kay. I mean, the Chancellor got up in front of the House of Commons just a couple of months ago and made it clear that inflation in this country wasn't being driven by wage increases for care home workers or railway workers or supermarket workers. It was being driven by energy prices. And, I would like Andrew Bailey and others to talk about profits as well as wages. Give you one example. Royal Mail last year handed out £400 million to its shareholders and at the same time, again, told its workers not to expect the real terms pay increase. There's got to be a balance, and that balance has got to work for working people. And it's no use talking about wages if you're not also going to talk about profits and the role of the government as an employer as well. Because obviously, again, the government announced last year that it was ending the public sector pay freeze. A few months later, the Prime Minister is telling public sector workers to expect the real terms pay cut. I mean, they've got to get the story straight. And frankly, the story at the moment doesn't work for working people.
Is Grant Shapps the right guy for the job?
Well, listen, I'm not going to comment on whether he's the right guy for the job or not. What I want him to do is to do the job he's got, and that means helping to resolve this dispute. And that, I think means stepping up to the plate and taking some responsibility rather than spending your time touring the TV studios and talking to newspapers about how bad the RMT are and how political they are and all the rest of it. Get round the table and help resolve this dispute.
Sounds as though you don't think he's the right guy for the job.
Well, I'd say I don't make ministerial appointments, Kay, and frankly, the TUC deals with whoever the Minister of the day is or whoever the Secretary of State of the day is. What I want to do is find a situation where those 40,000 railway workers get a decent pay rise, don't have job cuts imposed upon them, and that we actually work together to build a successful, sustainable railway in this country. The travelling public needs that. The people delivering the service need job security. There is a way forward here, but ministers need to find the key to unlock the door.
Do you think that the strike is going to go ahead?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there are talks happening today, Kay, and I think at the end of the day, not one of those 40,000 railway workers took that decision to vote for strike action lightly. They'll all lose pay if the strikes go ahead, but I'm pretty sure they're also very clear that they can't not go ahead if the government doesn't step up to the plate and take, impose job cuts, impose pay cuts off the table.
We are hearing that other workers as well, certainly via their unions, are considering balloting for strike action. We've made the comparison this morning about the winter of discontent. Are we heading for a summer of discontent, do you think?
I really just don't like those labels, to be honest with you, Kate, because I think what it does is it downplays the real concerns of the workers that we're talking about, whether they be teachers, whether they be rail workers, whether they be postal workers. These aren't workers who are taking strike action for the fun of it or because they're somehow politically motivated. They're workers who've got real concerns about things like pay. I mean, we've had the biggest squeeze on pay and living standards in this country for 200 years. Real terms wages are lower than they were a decade ago. And, I think a lot of our members are just saying, enough is enough. I can't afford to fill a car. I can't afford to do the weekly shop. I can't afford to pay the gas bills. Something's got to give. And that's why, I would hope that employers and governments take the concerns of their workers seriously, give people decent pay rises this year. Lots of those key workers that we're talking about across the public and private sector really, went that extra mile during the pandemic. And what's their reward? A real terms pay cut? Come on, surely Britain can do better than that, and certainly the government should be doing better than that.
OK, good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us.
Cheers, Kay. Thanks, bye.
Thanks a lot. Tamara, thoughts? Good morning.
Morning, Kay. Well, look, the TUC say that these last-ditch talks happening today between the rail companies and the RMT union may avert the strike, but the government are pretty clear that that is very, very unlikely to happen. The Treasury Minister, Simon Clarke, said people should prepare for strikes, prepare for a lot of disruption, because we expect there will be 40,000 workers from 13 train operators walking out this week. That will be the biggest walkout for 30 years. People who want to go to work, go to hospital appointments, go to enjoyable summer activities are going to be unable to do so. And it looks like the government is going to be unable to do anything about it. They say it's not their job to do anything about it. And I thought there was an interesting wider warning for the public sector there from the Treasury Minister. Of course, we're going to see bits of the public sector which have had a pay freeze for many years, now lifted, but now looking at, inflation running wild and very high energy bills. And the message of Simon Clarke was essentially you can't have a pay rise at inflation level because that will fuel more inflation. And he was saying there will be sacrifice involved for public sector workers. Tough a job as they do, they will have to put up with a pay settlement that is below what their expectations are.
Yeah. And we'll see you in the next hour and tomorrow's take at 9 o'clock. Looking forward to it. Thank you. Meantime, aid agencies are warning of a humanitarian catastrophe in eastern Africa due to drought and the impact of the war in Ukraine. The blockade of Ukraine's ports has caused a global food shortage and a sharp increase in prices. And in countries unable to grow their own food, the result could be devastating for millions of people. The Horn of Africa is facing severe drought after the rainy season failed for the 4th year in a row, with Somalia and the self-declared Republic of Somaliland facing the worst drought in 40 years. Almost 800,000 people have left their homes in the countryside to seek help in cities. Aid groups say the failed rains, inadequate humanitarian funding and the impact on prices because of the war in Ukraine have created a perfect storm that could quickly lead to famine. More than 7 million people are facing high levels of food insecurity in the coming months. And 1.5 million children under the age of 5 are facing acute malnutrition. Our International Affairs editor Dominic Waghorn reports from Mandera in the self-declared Republic of Somaliland. A warning his report begins with images of malnourished children receiving treatment, which viewers may find distressing.
2-month-old Mohammed is lucky to be alive. Born 8 weeks premature in a village all but wiped out by drought. Dika, his 17-year-old mother, travelled 400 miles to get him to hospital and didn't think he'd make it.
She was very, very upset and worried about her condition. First time she came, she was worried like he will die. Yeah, she was very, very, very worried, and she had pain about the child, and she doesn't sleep.
He still looks desperately ill, but doctors say he should survive. Many like him haven't. The ward is full. They're putting patients now on the floor. 1-year-old Mohammed is being given a nasal tube to feed him urgently needed fluids. Ward Dr. Abdul Rahman says he's afraid of what could be on the way.
The rains are not come early, the situation will come worse day by day, and the number of visitors will be increasing, even hour by hour, day by day, and we cannot handle it or we cannot save them.
Right across the Horn of Africa, they are bracing themselves for the double impact of war and famine. The worst drought in 40 years is combining with the effects of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The war there may be thousands of miles away from these markets, but it's pushing up the prices of grain and fuel to unprecedented levels, making the impact of the drought even worse. The drought now threatens the worst famine for years. Camps are already filling, with people who've lost any means of supporting their families. The parents are desperate. Like Sophia, a few months ago, well off by her standards, she's now destitute. She's had to move to the camp after the drought killed all her livestock.
My grandfather was a goat herd. My father was a goat herd. I grew up in that life and ended up with 500 goats and 4 camels, and they've all been wiped out. I've got nothing now.
The rains have failed for a 4th year. With no grass left for the goats, they pull leaves from trees to eat. But getting food to the people who need it will be a huge challenge. Across the region, millions are facing acute hunger in the worst drought in over a generation, compounded by the war in Ukraine. And without massive international help, agencies say hundreds of thousands will die of starvation. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News, Mandera, Somaliland.
Back at home, and it's not just the rail networks facing disruption in the UK since summer holidays season began. Airports across the country have struggled to cope with a post-lockdown influx of passengers. Joining us now is the Daily Telegraph travel editor. That's Claire Irvin, regular contributor to the programme, of course. Hi.
Hi.
Good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Shadow Levelling Up Secretary, that's Lisa Nandy speaking at the weekend, saying chaos at the ports, chaos on the railways, chaos at the airports. Chaos everywhere you go.
Yeah, couldn't have put it better myself. I mean, you know, after 2 years of not being able to travel, to suddenly have to face, you know, we've been saying all the way through, you've got to be flexible, you've got to, you know, just help as much as you can, be prepared, know your rights, be in touch with your operator, be in touch with the airline. And then to find that actually, despite all of that, you might not be able to get anywhere really is a massive blow for people just desperate, not just to go on holiday, but to be reunited. You know, we've still got situations where people haven't seen friends or family for years.
EasyJet again telling us that they're cutting their flights.
I know. I mean, so I have, you know, given where we are, I think future cancellations are actually a positive move. You know, I wouldn't wish that on any passenger, but yeah, if I have a flight booked, and it's going to be cancelled, I'd much rather know about that 2 weeks in advance rather than 2 hours in advance, which we were seeing over half term. Because then at least you have, you know, that really preciously ring-fenced time off. At least you know you might have half a chance of being able to go somewhere during that time. You know, it gives you much more time to arrange finances, to be able to claim compensation and make sure that you've done everything properly rather than in a mad last-minute panic.
Can't go anywhere by rail at the moment, though, can you, if you were planning on going to the Lake District or whatever? Well,
Again, that's requiring passengers to have to think on their feet, know what other options they've got, and, you know, I mean, it really is going to be a tough summer for passengers. So we're just saying, you know, if you want to go anywhere, be prepared. We've got all the advice that you need, whether you are hoping to go by rail, hoping to go by air, or even hoping to drive.
Which brings me on to my next point, staycations, of course. You know, they've been a big thing during the pandemic.
Yeah.
But with the cost of fuel, are people in a position where they can afford to fill up the tank a couple of times?
Well, good point. But also, it's not just fuel. We've seen staycation prices rise exponentially. We compared like for like a holiday in Spain with a holiday in the UK in Cornwall. And the holiday in Cornwall, guess what? A third more expensive. That's £3,000 to the £2,000 it costs in Spain. Wow. So really, I mean, you know, you would be... and also, we've seen hoteliers, Airbnb owners really, really ramp their prices up. Since the pandemic, since there was that huge rush for staycations, brilliant weather, nobody could go anywhere but the UK. And let's face it, the UK is amazing. You know, nowhere, I think, any island has got such diversity of options. And so the good news is, actually, if you're thinking of staying in the UK, there is probably somewhere quite relatively local to you that you maybe haven't thought of. So there are huge, really wonderful opportunities and alternatives to Cornwall. And depending on where you are in the country, I mean, you've got Suffolk, for example, lesser explored areas of Dorset, North Pembrokeshire, County Down. I mean, you know, all around the country, there are these kind of overlooked honeypots that you should consider.
So you talked about at least you know your flight's cancelled like a fortnight ahead, so you can plan. But we're now hearing that BA cabin crew are thinking about going on strike. So those, we don't know what sort of strikes there might be. There could be lightning strikes, there could be anything.
Yeah.
So how can you protect yourself against that?
Well, I mean, in short, you can't really.
The weekend, Terminal 2.
I mean, yeah, and you know, and the delays are horrendous. I got caught up in some delays over half term. I mean, it is misery wherever you look. And you know, travelling, particularly if you're travelling with family, trying to avoid this by travelling just with hand luggage is not an option. I mean, with delays at the airport, your hand luggage is going to be full of crisps for a start. But you, so you need to, we're advising where possible. I know it's slightly more expensive, but travel with a tour operator because they will, you know, they're bound then to get you to destination and get you back, which is very important, obviously. Know your rights, have full insurance, and make sure that you know, if something happens, that you claim compensation, so that you can rebook, you know, and that you're not left, you know, out of pocket as well as.
So we'll stay at home instead then, and we'll go to a festival perhaps. But of course, we might not be able to get to the festival. This is the old. Do you know who the oldest person is who's playing at Glastonbury?
Other than McCartney at 80.
He is. He is. Let's have a quick listen to him. Yeah, that's not him playing live, of course. But we can. The Beatles are so difficult to play their music, but if it's just his, then you can actually have a little snippet of it. There he is. Paul McCartney, the oldest at 80. Are you a festivals fan?
I am a festivals fan.
What's your top tips on festivals?
Top tips, well, again, just be prepared. I mean, particularly at the moment, going to Glastonbury, those roads are going to be absolute murder, so go as early as you possibly can, I would say. And, you know, like everything, be prepared. You know, your loo rolls, your water, although not in a plastic bottle at Glastonbury, you need your refillable bottle there. And
we endorse that message.
There's no such thing, of course, as bad wear. They're just the wrong clothes, so bear that in mind as well. We've seen people rolling around in mud at Glastonbury year after year. There is no need to do that.
Yeah, although apparently the weather's going to be pretty good this weekend.
So SPF.
Yes, SPF 50.
And a hat.
Yeah, are you planning on going anywhere?
I am currently considering my options for the summer, and I am a big fan of off-peak places. And
because you spoke to us from
Oman, yeah. And I just think, it's not based on science, but I just have a gut instinct that if I'm going to Rajasthan, which is where I am thinking of going in the summer, and everybody else is going to Spain, you know, I just hope that I'm the only person in that queue. It doesn't always work out that way.
The plane goes. OK, it's great to see you as always, Claire. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks a lot. We've got time to play Billie Eilish or not? Billie Eilish is the youngest to play at Glastonbury. Not cute. I'm getting old. I don't know why she's got blood around her mouth. I don't know. We'll see you at the top of the hour.